Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to another 80s throwback retro review here, to something along the lines of horror and along the lines also of a remake and along the lines of a second chance review for me, which is for the 1989 iteration of The Phantom of the Opera, starring none other than Robert Englund of Nightmare on Elm Street fame in this one. And the synopsis for this iteration is as follows. A young soprano becomes the obsession of a horribly disfigured composer who has plans for those who oppose him or the young singer. So yes, very similar to many, I would say the original, but there's been like 400 different adaptations. But back in April, I had checked out the 1943 Phantom of the Opera starring Claude Rains, and it was an interesting like retro road to kind of travel down to go that far back, and I'd created a video for it, which I will link to at the end, as well as a whole series of videos about the Nightmare on Elm Street films. But anyways, and a little bit more on how that viewing had kind of affected this one in just a little bit in the video. But anyways, I remember checking out this version of it when it first hit VHS back in, it was either 89 or 90, as I was a really big fan of Nightmare on Elm Street back then. And I was just not that into this film at the time. I just thought it was kind of okay. I think that it's because I really still had Freddy on the brain way too much going into this one. I was wanting something more exciting and more scary versus something so dramatic and romantic and tragic, having not been familiar with the source material back then. And as I got older, I was always interested in checking this one out again, but it's been hard to track down. But, as you may have guessed, I found it at Viper Video in Tampa for about $6 on Blu-ray, and I scooped it up. And I will say that I definitely like this one a lot more than that first time that I'd viewed it way back in the day. It is, of course, updated and takes place initially in the 80s with our lead character of Christine auditioning for an opera. She and a friend of hers had kind of found an old piece of music stored away at this archive in the library somewhere, from the later half of the 19th century from a composer they'd never heard of, but looking at what range that had and how that score was put together, Christine decides to use it in her audition. Now during her performance, which she completely knocks out of the park, there's an accident and she gets knocked out of consciousness and wakes up in the late 1800s. Now, this isn't really a time travel situation, but more like a previous life that she was kind of going back into, as she didn't seem to have any memories of this life. It was just her in that time getting this role in this opera, and we're launched into the more classic Phantom of the Opera kind of story. So it's very similar to the Rains one in some ways, at least in the major points. And that was my only issue. It was so similar to the other iterations such as the Rains one, Phantom of Paradise, Phantom of the Mall, and so on, which held many of the main points of the story, even though they had their own little take on it, that it seemed a little bit too familiar. That's really my only issue with it. But what made this one actually stand out, made me really enjoy it, was definitely Robert Englund's performance. He really brought his A game to this one. Like, he was just itching to do something to kind of get him out of just that Freddy persona, to do something more than Freddy, although he couldn't really escape being covered up in makeup. Not to the extent as he was in the Elm Street films, but still. And as far as that makeup goes, it was executed very well, with his character literally stealing skin from people that he's murdered and stitching it onto himself and using using makeup to kind of blend over that stitch and everything to try to replace his disfigured face. They also had some differences on how he became disfigured and everything, but it really added a gross factor to it that I hadn't felt in the previous iterations. And as for, not really spoiler, but maybe a minor one here, when he shows up at another point in the film, we do get to see him with no makeup at all, just pure Englund, which is nice. Comes across as very charming, and I don't really want to spoil anything else. But with that, they had also set this one up, from what I read, to have a sequel. They wanted to do a sequel directly off of this one called Phantom of New York, which would take place in modern times. But the movie didn't perform well, possibly because they really marketed this as like, first he was Freddy, now he's a Phantom, like really making these Freddy Krueger connections, and maybe others were going in expecting a more scary, gory film than this one was, like I had done. Maybe they wanted like a much more updated take on this than it being the way that they had released it, trying to stay a little bit more faithful to the original. So it lost money, the producer never recovered, and they never did the sequel. But strangely, over the years, it also has become very hard to track down. I looked across his Blu-ray, which without it, I would have just been out of luck, because according to Just Watch, at the time of this video at least, it's just not available on any streaming service anywhere, not even paid rental. The only place that it's available is on DVD and Blu-ray. They're still cheap, but it's still annoying if you just want to check it out that you would have to purchase this. But, keep an eye on different streaming services, because they seem to change from time to time, and different titles kind of flow in and out of them. And I know that, if we still had video rental stores, this wouldn't be as much of an issue, but though I really like to collect physical media, I don't really see a reason to bring back physical rentals that much. Even seeing ones like Redbox seeming to fade away. But at any rate, the change up to having our time spent in the beginning and at the end within the 80s, most of it taking place within the flashback of the 1800s, more detail on that makeup, a little bit of a different backstory, and especially Englund's performance makes this one more than worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this latest video for the Robert Englund version, as I call it, of Phantom of the Opera from 1989, which at the time of this video is available nowhere. I mean, it's only on disc, but if you are really interested, I don't know how much this retails for on Amazon, but the DVDs and Blu-rays are relatively cheap for this title. But like I said, keep a lookout on other streaming services, because it may just pop up in there again one day. Anyways, that's all I got for this one. Like I said, I'm going to have a couple links coming up. One to subscribe if you're new and you enjoy this, which if you did, I hope you give me a thumbs up and do subscribe. I will also have a link coming up in a moment for the previous Phantom of the Opera review that I did, and basically a playlist of when I had revisited all of the Elm Street films over the course of about 7 or 8 weeks. So stick around for those. Speaking of sticking around, thanks for sticking around to the end, and I will see you in the next one.